Hey and welcome to the EYFTM podcast, brought to you by the EYFTM podcast team. This podcast is accompanied by a study on listening behavior. Nadine, what's the study about?
Hey Fabian, I'm always listening to podcasts when I'm on my way to university every day. And I'm sure most of you are listening to podcasts too in your everyday life. But have you ever wondered how different podcasts influence your career choices or your personal life?
Well, if you want to find out more about the study, there's a link underneath this podcast in the bio. And now,
have fun with our EYFTM podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the 12th episode of the EYFTM podcast. My name is Fabian and today we are recording from Dublin in Ireland from the WONCA Europe conference. And just like in all of our podcasts, I have a very special guest here, someone who is very busy during the conference, but who's managed to give us a few of her minutes. I'm here today with Dr. Amanda Howe. Many of you might know her. For those who haven't heard of her, she's been a long-time GP specialist in clinical practice in the UK. She's been a long-time academic in primary care and primary health. She's been taken up a lot of leadership roles nationally, internationally, culminating in the presidency of the Royal College of General Practice, but also she's been the president for many years for the WONCA World Movement. And I'm very glad that she's actually here with us today. And thank you, Amanda, for taking a couple of minutes out of the busy WONCA Europe conference.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Is this your first podcast?
Almost my first. I think I've done one or two, but it's not something I've actually done very often.
In all of our podcasts, we've always tried to look at where people came from and how they ended up being in general practice. When you started medical school, was general practice on your career list? Was that something that you were always focused on?
I think I really didn't understand how medicine worked as a career when I started medical school. And for the first 3 years, we didn't see any patients anyway. It was more laboratory, lectures. And then once we went into hospital, it was really mainly hospitals. So we only went to general practice for 1 week in the whole of the 6-year course. But my interest in becoming a GP started really when I travelled in Africa, and people hardly got any local health care, community care, preventive care. And it made me realise what our NHS did for people. And then I got more and more interested in the first medical care, which was GP.
Do you remember the moment in Africa where you thought, oh, this is actually something for me? Do you remember that moment?
What I remember is I was travelling, I was doing like a voluntary work camp with other international students, not just medical, but I was with a friend and we were coming home and saying, this is what happens when there's no community care. People can't afford to go anywhere. The hospital's 40 miles away. There isn't any primary care. And my friend said his father was a GP. And he said, well, that's what the NHS does. And that's what GP does, isn't it? You go to the GP, you can see what we get that's different. And so that was really the moment where I started to think, yes, that's what general practice does. I hadn't really thought about it till then. No, and as I say, we didn't get much teaching from GPs at all in medical school. And in fact, when I said to one of my tutors, who was a kidney specialist, that I thought I wanted to be a GP, he said, bright girl like you, Howe, that's a bloody waste. So there was quite negative view about GP as a choice in that period.
What happened when you then went along with your choice and said, well, I'm going to do it anyway? How did people react? I
think I more and more made contact with other people who also were interested in primary care and general practice. And my friends and people I socialised with, and then were also people who mostly wanted to be GPs. Not all, but quite a lot. And then I found other contacts, health workers in primary care, who were interested in the same things, and that strengthened my intention. So in a sense, what the big guys in the medical school thought didn't matter because I'd found another community by then.
And how did you like your GP training?
I really liked my GP training. It was a very well-designed course. I went to Sheffield, which is in the north of England, different place from where I'd been before. Every week we had an afternoon of teaching where we'd bring not only, topics to learn with each other about different aspects that were in the curriculum, but also we had the chance to talk about patients and things that had bothered us. And we actually had like psychologists or counsellors, like a Balint group almost for part of the course. It was a really good course, and I had mostly placements that were relevant to general practice, so I could make them more relevant. Example, gynecology. The people who wanted to be gynecologists would go to theatres, and I would do outpatients.
Oh, wonderful.
And it was good. It was
Sounds
good.
like a very modern GP curriculum.
Yes, and there were a lot of people in Sheffield who were, again, also working together to try to innovate, and they welcomed the GP trainees to be in contact with them as well. So it was exciting, actually.
Did that motivate you to get into medical education later? Because that sounds like a very good experience, but then your medical school sounds like it wasn't really such a good experience when it comes to GP training.
You're exactly right. I made sure to choose a practice to work in that were interested in teaching and training. And then still I felt that there wasn't anywhere near enough exposure and in the undergrad curriculum. And when an opportunity came up for GPs to do some extra teaching for the medical school, so other people had started to win that opportunity ahead of me, I said to my practice, look, I'd love to do that. And it's really important we get more people. We'd all agreed that. And it just happened to be a good time when they could release me. So I applied for that job. But of course, one thing is your practice has to agree to let you play other roles. But my practice did. My family, by then, children in school, so I was a little bit freer. And so the two came together, really. And I applied and I got a role on the medical school campus. And then I could say more.
Yeah, go.
Okay, well, so what I realised quite quickly was that if we really wanted to change the medical school course, you had to be a voice who would be listened to. So the professor was doing his best to champion that cause, and one or two of his senior colleagues as well. But he wanted people to go on to the curriculum committees. And, guess what? I'm the youngest person. I'm the only woman. I'm a GP, and I'm not even a full-time academic. So there was certainly some credibility gap that I had to fight. And at the same time, I was really interested in the idea of doing a little bit more academic work. I'd, always loved doing academic work at university, but I hadn't had much chance in GP. So I then did a doctorate. In that period, it put me in a position then to think about getting a proper academic job so that I could be more influential within the medical school than I could be as a part-timer.
Sounds like a very busy time, though. You were doing your GP training. You had your
No, this is after.
I know, but you had your children while you were in the training. You were interested in medical education in your practice. And then after that, you decided to go back to university, essentially, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, for the first period in practice, and I would say this to other doctors, don't try and do it all at once.
Right.
So I spent the first few years, really understanding what being in practice meant, getting into being part of the team, part of that system, having my small family. Maybe if I'd had a bigger family, would have been different. People get different opportunities and choices. And then, yes, it was busy doing a degree and teaching on top of that. In fact, one of my friends doing the same, we used to laugh. How much time did you spend after everybody had gone to bed doing your study?
How much time did you
Time
spend?
did you spend after everybody else went to sleep?
And how much time did you spend?
Oh, I don't know, a couple of hours, something.
Wow. Well,
but it worked, and I had the personal opportunity and the space to do that. And by the time I got the change in job, again, my family were older, situation was a little bit different. So, but I do think you have those sort of things. Sometimes you'll see an opportunity and you can take a little step towards it, like doing one module of research methods and then another module, because you don't have to do it all at once.
Right. You did quite a lot of postgraduate education to also gain that credibility at the university, I guess. You went into medical education, you did a master's in medical education, you did your doctorate. Did it help getting your university credibility?
Well, yes, two ways it helped. It helped me to be more competent in education, so I didn't just know about it, I understood it.
Yeah.
I actually had mastered it, you know.
Yeah.
So by the time I was creating curriculum and exams myself, I did have some of the competency to do it. So it gave me depth and new skills. But also I got a job. I got a full-time academic senior lecturer post. And in that sense, then I was able to lead negotiations for the department at that level, which as a GP tutor I couldn't do.
How did you manage your time during that period? You said, well, there's a lot of after-hours work at home. How did you manage that?
Well, when I became a full-time academic, I had to reduce my commitment to the practice. That was a big change. I had to go from being almost full-time to being minimum part-time, just 2 days a week.
Which is still a lot. I mean,
but I couldn't do, like I used to be the named doctor for patients who were dying. I couldn't do that anymore because I wasn't there enough. So it was a big change. Again, my practice accepted. But I think after that, you know, the academic world had the bigger space and the clinical world had the smaller space. And for the second half of my career, that's how it was.
And then you got another massive chance or opportunity where you got to be one of the co-founders of a medical school and you designed primary care focused undergraduate medical curriculum. How did that happen?
In the 1990s, the change that I was involved with was, there were other people, of course, and again, you don't get change usually just because you want it. There have to be other people also allied, pushing for the same thing nationally, and eventually our accrediting body, the General Medical Council, gave a report called Tomorrow's Doctors, where they told the medical schools that medical practice was changing, more was being done in the community, GPs were being trained as specialists, and the undergraduate situation had to change. So from being pushing on a closed door, we were pushing on a door that became a little bit open. And that also led to some new medical schools being allowed to open and funded. And the people who bid for the Norwich Medical School had made a very good design where they already had said from the first week of the first year, students will go to the community. So I agreed with that idea. That's why I applied. And I had to make it a reality and help the GPs and the clinics to know how to do it so often, for what purpose, in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. But the bid was already there. So I was embracing a vision that others had already created.
It reminds me a bit of your own personal experience, though, where you said medical school was so non-GP based, and then your postgraduate training was such a brilliant modern curriculum, really. Reminds me a bit of your own career. And so you actually got to change the part that really you didn't appreciate when you went to medical school and there was no GP focus.
Yes, and so I think I was very fortunate that my vision, values, and the needs of the modern health service all came together, again with other people having the same momentum, and eventually the powers who had control agreeing. So yes, it was a story. And my international work, partly as an academic, once I started to do research and teaching, academic conferences nationally and internationally became a more common way to take your work and share it, and that was part of the normal practice for academics. But that meant I met people again from other countries and reminded myself quite quickly that many other countries hadn't made that jump. General practice wasn't a specialty. Yeah. The students weren't seeing any good practice in the community and clinical care. And colleagues were asking some countries that had it to come and help them to, do things differently. And so what mattered to me in my own place also mattered to me in other places. And that's how I eventually got involved with WONCA, I guess.
Yeah, that's another very interesting element. My head buzzes just from listening to this part of your career. You were very, very, very busy during that time, but you still managed to make it work. And at that point, after having redesigned or founded a new medical school, You also started in a lot of leadership roles, nationally and internationally. And for those of you who don't know how the English GP system works, the Royal College of General Practice, essentially it's the national body for GPs, right?
Yeah.
And you got to be its president.
Well, that was the last bit of my career.
Okay.
So the Royal College, I have to say, was, again, important to me right from when I became a GP trainee. So my first month in Sheffield, the local GP community of the college members invited the new trainees and welcomed them and said, we're very pleased you're becoming GPs. And then when I was a GP, my local faculty again would encourage people to help them to run educational events and do things that were good for us as GPs and as members. So I always saw the college as kind of a good thing. And then once you start thinking about creating change, of course, because the college is the national member, then, you know, you start looking to that level to think, well, we need something to shift nationally. So let's, you know, go to that network to ask them about helping to get more GPs to be in medical schools or whatever.
Or in education.
Yeah. And then I think the other change was once I was in that, went to Norwich and I was in more senior academic roles, other colleagues who were in senior roles, you know, we had our networks, people would talk. I had some friends who were active in the college and they were saying, can you come to the research committee? Could you help with this? So they were giving me opportunities, and I'll talk more about opportunities and mentors if you'll let me, because they were giving me opportunities. And my attitude was always to say if it felt like it fitted with my values and my vision and I could possibly fit it in, I would say yes. So I did go to those things and learned a lot and found myself again then on, you know, finding out how the college works at a national level, and then people saying, you know, had you considered doing this role or that role? So I actually held 3 different roles at national leadership level within the RCGP. And in the last, I would say, 15 years of my career, I did more of that work. Once the new medical school was settled and my team was settled and we had the model and everything was running nicely, then most of my energy went into those more national roles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you remember the first time as a GP trainee when you were invited for that, hey, welcome to the Royal College meeting? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Would you have thought back then that you were going to be the college's president at some point?
No, absolutely not. 3 things, I think. I didn't know that those roles were possible. I had, you know, it wasn't the world that I was living in at that point. Also, as a woman, I think, although I was by then a feminist, I didn't really think about those very senior roles as being accessible to me. And you have to also remember that I hadn't even thought about becoming a doctor until one of my teachers at school said to my parents, you know, Amanda's bright enough to do medicine, because our family were, you know, well off. My father had a good job, but, you know, we hadn't got that background. So it was more that as I became more senior myself, then I started to understand how things worked. And by then I could think, well, you know, so-and-so thinks I could do that. Maybe I could do that. Would I want to do that, or would I prefer to do? So as you build up your own competency and confidence, then I think you become more aware that perhaps you could play some of these bigger roles, but I certainly never saw it.
So
from the beginning.
So there was no agenda.
No,
anything.
And I didn't design my career to end up there. It wasn't it was much more about emergent understandings and opportunities. And as I say, colleagues showing me opportunities that otherwise I wouldn't probably have thought of.
I guess it's always easier to design a curriculum for others than to design one's own curriculum.
Well, yes. But a career in family medicine, I think most careers, you know, they're always made up of who you are, what you're interested in, what you're good at. Now, I have to say, I don't think you get invited to new opportunities if you haven't already delivered on the ones that you are committed to. I've seen people be over-ambitious and people say, you know, that's not working. You have to do the job
first.
And then question of what you'd be interested in. So we know, don't we, that different GPs have different special interests. Some will be education and academic work. Some will be clinical special interests. Some will have, you know, a sports life or or a personal life that they prioritise beside their clinical work. It's a question of, you know, who you are, interests, and also what is possible, because some things, you know, don't work out or aren't always possible, or life happens and, you know, you change. But for me, that was the progression.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Before we keep going, I've got so many more questions for you. We've got a little game in this podcast. Most of our listeners will know it already. It's called an A and B game. It's been adapted from a German podcast. And they're 50-word pairs. The idea is to pick and choose the word that comes to mind or that you identify with the most. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. You can always say skip or next. And then afterwards, if there's one that you want to discuss, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Are you ready for the game?
Yes, sort of.
Dublin or London?
At this moment, Dublin.
London or Sheffield?
Pass.
Toronto or UK?
UK.
English breakfast or fish and chips?
Pass.
Norwich or London?
Norwich.
WONCA or EYFDM, so European Young Family Doctors Movement?
They are a partnership.
I know. Pass. All right. WONCA or Royal College of General Practice?
Pass.
President of WONCA World or President of Royal College of General Practice?
Pass.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Tea with or without milk?
With milk.
Cookie or no cookie?
Cookie.
Breakfast or lunch?
Lunch.
Lunch or dinner?
Dinner.
GP trainee or undergraduate student?
GP trainee.
GP education or undergraduate medical education?
GP education.
Curriculum reform at a university or GP teaching leadership?
I think curriculum reform.
Clinical work or research?
Clinical work.
Clinical work or education?
Clinical work.
Congress travel or holiday travel?
Pass.
Conference or pre-conference?
Conference.
Professor or GP?
GP.
Book author or GP?
GP.
Starting a medical school or GP?
GP.
Backpack or suitcase?
Backpack.
On the go or home sweet home?
On the go.
Working holiday or holiday work?
Working holiday.
Work-life balance or life-work balance?
Life-work balance.
Train or plane?
Train.
Car or plane?
Car.
Walking or biking?
Biking.
Hotel or Airbnb?
Hotel.
Women's health or academic primary care working parties?
I'm afraid academic primary care working.
Sheffield University or Norwich Medical School?
Norwich Medical School.
Sheffield Botanical Gardens or London Eye?
Sheffield Botanical Gardens.
Call or email?
Email.
Mobile phone or laptop?
Laptop.
Both op surgery in Norwich or Norwich Medical School?
Pass.
Primary care or public health?
Actually, I'll say Norwich Medical School.
Norwich
on the
Medical
last
School.
one.
Okay, Norwich Medical School.
No offence, both are.
Very nice place. Primary care or public health?
Primary care.
Professionalism or resilience?
Professionalism.
Master's course director or chair of the school's professionalism committee?
Chair of the Professionalism Committee.
Family or work?
Skip.
Mental health or physical health?
Mental health.
Day or night?
Day.
Empowerment or support?
Empowerment.
Community-based medical education or traditional medical education?
Community-based.
Patient safety or professionalism?
Patient safety.
Resilience or doctors' well-being?
Doctors' well-being.
Early intervention or symptom treatment?
Early intervention.
National or international networks?
International networks.
Writing a paper or reviewing a paper?
Writing a paper.
Beers or sparkling wine?
Sparkling wine.
Garden party or welcome reception?
Welcome reception.
Take time or keep busy?
Keep busy.
That was it. Thank you very much, Amanda. Were there any pairs that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I guess the WONCA and the RCGP, because, of course, our member organisation and our international links organisation is really different.
Yeah.
But I've had huge identity, support and commitment with both. So it's kind of, the family and work is really difficult because I couldn't have done what I did without my family support. And I know it costs them something. But then I wouldn't have wanted not to do the work I've done. Yeah. So, anyway.
So it's good
difficult
that you said,
questions, guys.
Good that you said skip then. One of the things that you just mentioned was WONCA and Royal College, because after having done such an important role for the Royal College of General Practice, you then became quite involved, or you were already quite involved with WONCA, but how did you then become the president?
Of WONCA?
Yeah.
Okay, so just to be clear, my college officer roles 2009 to 2015 were honorary secretary and professional development. So my presidency of the Royal College followed my WONCA
apologies.
one.
Sorry.
It
Yeah.
was
I got it
my
wrong.
last, but
My
no, it's
apologies.
okay. But I think the question about how do you become president of WONCA, I mean, I got involved with the Women's Working Party. The Women's Working Party were
What was that
very
about?
active to particularly with dialogue with World WONCA about equity of opportunity, access, careers, governance, all sorts of things. And that sort of took me into the central part of WONCA than perhaps I had been when we were doing, obviously, Women's Working Party, women's health and women's careers in family practice were the two themes. But there was an interface with the central guys. And they were keen, I think, to have more people engaged with what WONCA as an organisation was trying to do and how it would develop and so on. And so again, one thing led to another, and people encouraging me to stand for office in a rather surprising, way. But anyway, that's where I ended up as president. And then the Royal College role was almost the last of my career.
Right. Sorry,
I
was
was
my
the
bad.
pandemic president, so I didn't quite do what I'd expected to be doing as college president, but we did it anyway.
What was it like being the president during the pandemic?
Well, we just couldn't go out. So the president usually, we have a chair who does the political things and the president who does the membership, graduations, awards, supporting visits. Couldn't do any of that. I had a few at the beginning, a few at the end, and the rest we were just trying all to help our members to do what was needed in the pandemic. So, it was different, but it's okay.
And what's it like being a president for WONCA World? What's your role?
Well, again, it's a combination of being the figurehead for the advocacy stuff. So one of the leads with WHO, government's policy, not the only person, of course, but, part of that very senior voice for the organisation, trying to put together the priorities and needs of members. And we've seen yesterday our current president, Karen Flegg, talking about the 5 priorities. Internally, of course, you're trying to do what any leader has to do, work as a team, help the organisation to flourish, look at the difficult stuff, pull people together to try to support each other in the different situations they find themselves, encourage the parts of the organisation who we really need for the future, like the young doctors movements. And that was a big improvement, I would say, during my time in WONCA. They're really visible now, and congratulations to you and the rest of the guys who've been doing that, because that really mattered too. So it's a combination of organisational development, political advocacy and membership recognition.
Thank you, Amanda. That was very valuable insights in how you managed to find your path through general practice. Is there anything that you really want to share with the younger generation when you look back at how you did it all and how you managed to actually accomplish so much?
Yes, there's a lot I could say about that. I'll try to be brief.
Well, there's a lot of time. This podcast can go endlessly.
Don't tempt me. I think, first of all, it's important to, if you have made the choice for general practice and you know that that's because you think it's right for you as a person, it's the kind of doctor you want to be, you enjoy the breadth of clinical practice and the breadth of people and their lives and the things that you see while you're practicing and help with, then even if sometimes are difficult, try and remember that, and try with your teams and on your own to try and think what went well today as well as what's troubling you've got to go back to tomorrow, whatever. Try and congratulate yourselves, try and support each other. The second thing is always try and have a mixed network that will support you. So often it's have a peer group, other colleagues who are at the same stage of your career who you can talk to outside your work setting. Have a mentor perhaps, or somebody again who's a safe space, perhaps more senior, who if you're running into difficulties and you're not quite sure how to tackle it, you can talk to them without having to go to your bosses or your immediate colleagues or wherever the situation is tough. try and learn about, this is theory that'll help the emotions, about how to manage change effectively, how to create change effectively, how to advocate effectively, how to make teams and meetings work well. Because I wasn't taught any of those, even on my specialty training. And yet, there are literatures and evidence that can really help us to get that right or get it wrong. And they're all levels that we will be working at in any clinical setting. And then think about your career as something that, at different stages, it's good to have a change. So I do think that people, when you're talking portfolios or special interests, it does, refresh you. And seeing patients all the time or running your clinic only is quite tough. So I think to have different aspects to the week is very important. And then all the things we tell our patients that also help our own well-being, which is to make sure you have relaxation time, exercise time, family and friendship time, forget about it time. I think that all those things, help us to be resilient. And, if things are tough, don't be surprised. Life can be tough. We know that. But it's still a fantastic job, and GPs are doing something really, really worthwhile. Yeah. So remember that.
Thank you so much. Those were very nice closing words. Amanda, thank you so much. Thank you for taking some time for us in this podcast. I know your week here in Dublin is super busy. Thank you so, so much. And hopefully we will all see you at the Grand Region Forum, so the EYFDM Forum 2025. Amanda's probably going to come and be one of the keynote speakers. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you too. And well done, everybody, and all best wishes.
Thank you.